Okay, thanks to Gemma for putting us online, and to the entire JLE as usual, and to all of you participants throughout the world, wherever you are. Let me remind you as usual that if you are logged on through the JLE, I can see your chat questions and comments. It'll be a pleasure to answer if I can. If you're on one of the other platforms where we're streaming, so I do not see you. Got a couple of messages last week from people, but I can't see them during the session, so that's nothing I can do to answer questions directly live. Greetings to Carol in Tarzana, California, Danny in Israel, I think, Yechiel in London, Brian, Tarzana, good, Shoshana, Elliot, we find, Mazel Tov, Nasanul Chaim Pinchas, great, Danny, Mazel Tov on that. Howard, okay, Mitra, still with us, good to see that. Okay, so greetings to everyone, and let us take the next step in our voyage. Mickey and family, greetings as well, going back to old times. I'm sure you know it all by now. I'm sure you've heard everything I have to say. Still, we'll try and think of some new things. Heather in Tarzana, whoa, we've got a whole team out there in California. That's 3 people from the same town. Okay, good, always welcome. Must be a Torah revolution in Tarzana. Let us take the next step in our voyage through the great ideas. As you know, on Mondays we look at the great the great actions, namely mitzvahs, and on Wednesdays we try to look at the great ideas. We have been looking in this series at free will. We discussed the very thorny problem of foreknowledge and free will. We went on to discuss 2 sessions devoted to the point of free will and some of its applications. This is an endless subject and the fundamental subject really in all human activity and all Torah engagement. Let's turn to the next subject now, in some ways the most difficult of all. So I'm warning you, this is a distressing subject for some people. For many people who've not studied the subject deeply, I will be saying things contrary to what you assume is the Torah position. Even people with a serious learning background tend to get this subject wrong. And I'm going to try to share with you Rav Moshe Shapiro's approach to this, and I'll try to convince you that there really is only one approach to this subject. So you need to hold on tight for this. There's going to be a lot to absorb, a lot of steps to this discussion. I must warn you, this is challenging and complex. I would like not to water it down, but to present it at the best level I can. And so it's going to take effort, concentration, and above all else, what we always say, these. What are these called, please? Tell me, please. Make my day. Type me in. What are these things called? New ears, exactly. New ears. Not to hear things in the same old tired way, but to hear them in a completely new way. Put aside all preconceptions. Before you ask a question, think 10 times. Let's absorb a new subject. You are totally free to disagree. You can disagree with everything I say, but first understand. Once you've understood the subject and understood the presentation, then you can have your own opinion with the greatest of pleasure, but not until you've understood the subject. And the subject I would like to talk about in free will now is the thorniest of all problems, and that is, does my free will ever affect you? Let me explain. Here's what I'm going to do. Explain the problem briefly, take a step back into a scenario which I hope you'll find challenging and interesting, and then circle back through a discussion of this very vexed issue in order to answer the questions we began with. If you'd like a reference to the material, not the scenario and all the applications, that we'll do uniquely here, but if you'd like a documentation of the subject, you can take a look at my book, Will, Freedom and Destiny, which works through many of the areas of free will. And in chapter 8, you will find a section dealing with this very problem, documented. I have some other sources. I'm actually doing the book in Hebrew now, and in that book you will find, hopefully in a few weeks it'll be ready, in that book you will find not only this material, but the actual primary sources printed out in full, so you won't have to go searching for the difficult to find sources. You'll be able to actually follow the argument and then turn to the back section of the book and actually read the primary sources. So let me explain the problem, then we'll take a trip through some areas that are very more than difficult, and try to come to a genuine understanding of this extremely difficult and problematic and I would say even distressing subject. Does my free will ever affect you? Here's the question. Here's the question. Let's say a person uses their free will in such a way that it affects them. No problem. Let's say, for example, I do something dangerous and I get hurt. That doesn't raise any philosophical problem. Surely, if I'm certainly free to harm myself. Right? That is easily understood. The problem is, what happens when I try to harm you? When one person tries to harm another one in a way that the recipient does not deserve. We have here the classical clash between Bechira, namely my free will, and Hashgacha, your divine providence. So let's speak out these two sides clearly. On the one hand, I'm a free agent in the world. I can do mitzvahs, averos. I can certainly do things that God does not want. No question about that. God commands me not to do certain things. He tells me very clearly there's certain things He does not want me to do. Bad things. And I'm certainly free to do them. Right? That's clear. Otherwise there'd be no concept of punishment in the world. So I clearly can go against God's will. What happens when I apply myself against God's will to do something to someone else who doesn't deserve what I'm trying to do to them? Let's look at that side of the equation. We certainly believe that there's Hashgacha. We talk about Hashgacha Pratis. That means the individual divine providence that governs what happens to you. Right? And we have many sources that say that you don't stub a toe unless there's a divine providence. Not only that, the particular stone that you stub your toe on is preordained or divinely set up. So nothing happens to you without Hashgacha, that's clear, surely. God is not leaving you to a hefker life in which you are a leaf blown in the winds of chance. He's watching over you, giving you what you deserve. If you deserve something, He'll give it to you. If you don't deserve it, He won't. Surely that's a fundamental belief in Judaism that there's Hashgacha Pratis. What happens when the two clash? You do not deserve to be harmed. You do not deserve to be harmed, and I try to harm you. Now we're in trouble. Now we're in big trouble. Either I'll be able to harm you, which is terribly unfair in terms of what you deserve, or I'll not be able to harm you, which is terribly unfair in terms of my free will. Right? I hope you can see the problem. Let me phrase the most acute and extreme example of this problem to set the scene. Stay carefully with me, because everything I'm going to say is built on this model, and this is what you need to hear clearly. Miss this fundamental, nothing will make sense. Mr. A is walking down the street. Walking down the street on a sunny morning, whistling a tune. No cares in the world. At that moment, you happen to have an interview with God, Hashem. You, an onlooker. Great privilege. You say to Hashem, Hashem, how do you feel about Mr. A walking down the street? And Hashem says, he's cool. You say, Hashem, are you planning to kill him today? Hashem says, no. As far as I'm concerned, he has 25 more years to live. Lots of good stuff he can do in the world. No, I'm not going to kill him. While you're talking to God, Mr. B turns the corner and tries to kill Mr. A. Now we're in big trouble. Now we're in deep philosophical trouble. If Mr. B kills Mr. A, what happened to the Hashgacha? Hashem wasn't going to kill him. Is it possible that B could kill A when God was not planning it? What happened to the fact that A did not deserve it? He did not deserve to die today. God was not going to kill him. On the other hand, if you say that Mr. B could not kill Mr. A because A doesn't deserve it, what happened to the free will of B? I hope you can see the problem. If you try to resolve the problem this way, let's say you resolve it like this. Well, if B killed A, it must mean that A was going to die anyway then. That's the only possible interpretation. If God's not going to kill A, he does not deserve to die, B will be unable. He'll pull the trigger, but the gun will jam, he'll sneeze, the bullet will go over his head. There's no way that he can kill A. But if you say that, you're very much limiting the free will of Mr. B to perpetrate murder. If, on the other hand, you say B kills A, then you say the only interpretation is A was going to die then anyway. There's no way B could kill him if it was not his time to die. Which means that he was going to die anyway. Which means that B never did anything in the world that was not going to happen anyway. He becomes the agent, he pulls the trigger, he's guilty of murder, there's no question about that. But he never did anything to A that wasn't going to happen. When Mrs. A has a violent reaction to B, you killed my husband. B will say, but lady, he was going to die then anyway. Sure, I'm a murderer and I'll take the consequences, but I never caused anything to happen to your husband that was not going to happen anyway. Right? I hope we see the difficulties we're getting into here. Either way you deal with this problem, you're in trouble. You either need to limit the power of the actor, or you need to limit, right, the hashgacha, the divine providence of the recipient. Either one is very uncomfortable. I'm already getting comments on my screen. Give me a second. I'm not sure what this question means. Somebody's already trying to give me answers. We're just holding by the question yet, okay? Please. We're only just holding by building the question. At this point, please give me a quick yes if you see the difficulty. Please, give me a quick yes. Okay, I want you to give me a no if you don't understand the problem. I don't want to speak to myself here. Anybody doesn't see the problem? Romy, nice to see you with us. Okay, good. Now let's take a step back now that we understand the issue. And by the way, I think this applies on the good side too. Let's say you try to help somebody. You know somebody's struggling financially, you give them a good sum of money to help them. Well, was that in the hashgacha? Were they going to get it anyway? Had it not been for you, they would have won the premium bonds, or some long-lost uncle would have left them a legacy. Well, surely they're not going to get any money that wasn't predetermined at Rosh Hashanah. Surely they weren't going to get money that they don't deserve that wasn't coming anyway. Of course you get the mitzvah. It's your mitzvah to help them. No one's denying that. No one's denying that. Danny, I'm talking about when it's good for them. Why are you making complications? I'm talking about when you help someone. When you do something that is good for somebody that helps them. Was that in the hashgacha or not? Don't get sidetracked, Danny. You're a logical computer mind. Right? No sidetracking here. Did you help them or did you not? Were they going to get it anyway or not? If it was in the hashgacha, they deserved it. Surely they would have gotten it. Of course you get the mitzvah. You chose to be the one to do it. But it would have happened anyway. Or do we say you can give someone a benefit that was not going to happen? Which means you're overriding the hashgacha. Right? I think you can see the difficulty. Let's take a step back. And I would like to share with you a fascinating scenario. This is going to be a sidetrack, which we will need our discussion in order to resolve. I warned you this is going to be a long, circuitous route with many layers. So if you're not that kind of person, now's the time to go and play solitaire or something, do something else. Make yourself an omelette. But if you like thinking deeply, then stay with me. Here is a fascinating scenario. During the life of the Pischei Tshuva, you're going back more than 100 years, one of the great commentators, later commentators on the Shulchan Aruch, Pischei Tshuva. For those who have a textual ability, you can look this up. It's in Choshen Mishpat Yud Ches. It's in Choshen Mishpat Yud Ches, which is a section of the Code of Jewish Law. Make a note and you can look it up. In the Pischei Tshuva, who's a commentary on the Code of Jewish Law. And here's a question that he received, which he records. Listen carefully to the question. It's quite an amazing question. During his time, there was a learned individual, a rabbinic figure of senior stature. Who it was, I don't know. But this rabbi was visiting a certain place in Europe where they had a commercial exposition. People came to buy and sell. A fair where people came to buy and sell. And in that particular place where business was done, there was an agreed system that if anyone had a dispute, financial dispute, they would make a beis din. A beis din consists of three individuals, right? Three individuals, and these three will hear all the evidence and come to a decision based in Jewish court of law. In fact, even the non-Jews in that place used to subject themselves to the same form of arbitration. It was very well known. Well, what happened is he was doing business in that particular place, visiting, and sure enough, two Jews had some financial disagreement. And in due course, they constituted a beis din. What did they do? As was their way, they elected, co-opted two members of the local community who were there at the time to be judges. And since he was a recognized rabbinic figure, they couldn't very well ignore him. They asked him to be the third member of the beis din. You know, a Jewish court of law always has an odd number of judges, right? Unlike American juries that have 12, right? We never have an even number of decisors. We always have an odd number, which means you can never have a hung decision, can never be 50% on both sides. You'll always have a resolution in any vote. And so, we have three people as a minimum on a beis din. And what happened was the three judges sat to hear the case. There were two of these laymen from the local people, and there was this very learned rabbinic figure who was the third opinion. And this rabbi writes in his question to the Pischei Tshuva the following fascinating dilemma. He said the case began to be heard, and as the evidence began to accumulate, it became apparent to him that the other two judges were lying. The two laymen who were on either side of him were lying. They had clearly no interest in voting for the truth. They were clearly partial to one of the litigants. They were clearly going to vote falsely, money would change hands in the wrong direction, and worst of all, he would be party to a miscarriage of justice. In other words, the two judges would vote their lie, he would vote the truth, he'd be outvoted by 2-1, the case would then be resolved in favor of the wicked party, the culpable party, money would change hands, and there's nothing he could do. Let me remind you that in Jewish law, this is discussed in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, let me remind you that in Jewish law, if a judge disagrees with the majority, his opinion may not even be registered. You know, in the American Supreme Court, you have the majority opinion, and then there's a minority opinion it's called a dissenting opinion. In Judaism, that's forbidden. After the vote takes place, let's say there's a court case, and I'm sitting with 2 other judges, and these 2 other judges vote against you, and I'm in your favor. I'm forbidden to come up to you after the case and say, I was on your side, but I was outvoted. I'm not even allowed to disclose that. The reason is, again, this is not our subject directly, but the reason is that in Jewish law, a majority is completely dispositive. That means definitive. When the 2 outvote the one disappears. I'm sure you know that in Judaism, a majority defines a reality. You're cooking a meat soup and a little bit of milk falls in, it's fine. Don't try this at home. But if a minority of milk falls into meat, it's all meat. If your sukkah has 51% covering, it's fine, it's 100% covered. Somebody's asking me about Zomimin. We are nowhere near Zomimin. I don't know what is going on here. But please, stay focused. Okay, please, if you're gonna go off wildly at tangents, I'm not going to be able to do this. Just listen to what's being said. Okay, please. This is a straight, standard case of 3 judges judging a case. 2 of them are liars. We're not talking about false witnesses. That's Hazama. We're talking about 2 judges out of the 3 are lying, and the 3rd judge is powerless to stop it. He will be party to a miscarriage of justice, and there's nothing he can do. So he sat there thinking about it, and he thought, I have a solution. I can say I don't know. I don't know. What happens when a judge says, I don't know? The case is closed, or they get other judges, they start again, but that phase of the case is closed. And the reason is, because if one judge refuses to vote, he says, I don't know, you have 2 left. 2 is an even number. And an even number of judges is never valid on a Jewish Beis Din. So he could hang the case, right, by recusing himself effectively. He could say, I don't know. But he said his dilemma was, in order to say, I don't know, he would have had to lie. Because he did know. Now that's an interesting question. Do you lie to have a truthful outcome, or do you say the truth to have a false outcome? What is the truth in Judaism? Let's get this clear. It's a fascinating moral dilemma. If he lies, I don't know, I'm incapable of deciding, which is a total lie, which is completely contrary to a judge's obligations in Beis Din. Right? Completely false. Then a better outcome will take place. The case will be, you will not have money passed in the wrong direction. But if he votes for the truth, he'll become party to a case in which the majority outvotes him, and a criminal action will take place. What does God want from me here? Does he want me to say the truth for a lie to result? Does he want me to say a lie for the truth to result? Okay? Brian, as it happens, you're wrong, but I think you're still trying to provide answers instead of understand the question. So, that's a fascinating question. Good, accepted. Let me set this up for you a little bit better. Let's say you're sitting at home one day, the phone rings. Your wife picks it up, and from her tone of voice you realize this is someone you don't want to speak to. So you quickly do this. You get up, you run to the door, and you stand on the outside of the doorstep, and you say, I'm not home. And your wife says, I'm sorry, he's out. Now tell me, is that a lie or the truth? Please, give me an answer. You said, I'm not home. Your wife said he's not in. Right? Is that truth or lie? Answer me, please. Type in what you think. In Jewish law, that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. That's a lie. Why? Because the question is not asking. Oh, I'm getting a lot of creative answers. People are hedging their bets. This is a lie. The meaning of the question is not which side of the doorstep your husband's standing on. You cannot construe it that way. We don't go by legal niceties. We go by what's meant. Right? I hope this is clear to you. Right? This is all learned from a fascinating issue in Torah. When Yaakov claims to be Esav, this is not a subject we can go into now. We'll have to do it sometime in the future. Fascinating question. How does Yaakov come along and tell his father that he's Esav when he's the man of truth? How does that turn out to be truth? Okay. We'll have to deal with that. So I'll give you a clue, by the way. I'll just give you a clue. He was Esav. He was Esav. He had bought Esav from him. He had bought the firstborn right, and he'd bought the brachas. He had made a full-on legal transaction. He was coming to claim the rights of the firstborn as Esav, because that's the persona he had taken over. But anyway, that's not our subject for now. So now I'm getting all sorts of peripheral questions. Please stay focused. We've got lots of work to do on this subject. I'm not discussing the case of what you can do in those circumstances. Stay with me, please. Let's focus. So, given that the context is very important in constructing the truth, what should he say on the Beis Din? He sat there thinking about it for a while, and he said he came up with what he thought was a resolution of his question. And here's what he said. The Talmud says, and this is brought down in halachic sources, what happens if the Sanhedrin, the great Sanhedrin, this is not 3 judges, this is 23 judges, or 71 judges, depending on the circumstances, the Sanhedrin is judging a case. So let's imagine that this is a major case, a capital case, a life and death case, which we don't have today, of course. But in classical times, in Torah times, put ourselves into that frame of mind. There's a Sanhedrin, let's call it 71 judges. They're sitting in the great marble chamber on the Temple Mount, and a court case is taking place of these judges. Now let's assume it's a capital case. Someone's on trial for his life. Again, we cannot do that today. Even in classical Jewish times, you probably know that getting a capital conviction in Judaism is almost impossible. The corroboration of witnesses is almost impossible to satisfy. Again, this is a long subject. But nominally and notionally, the Torah does have capital. By the way, if you'd like some homework, why does the Torah have so many death sentences and make it almost impossible to apply? Why does the Torah posit death sentences for certain things and make it almost impossible to apply a death sentence in real time? Why would it do that? Okay, side point. Remind me, we can come back to that. So this Sanhedrin is judging a case. Now, they've heard all the evidence, they're about to vote. You know, they sat in a semicircle, right? They sat in a half circle so they could all see each other. And the voting took place from junior to senior. Right? The most junior on the Sanhedrin, believe me, you had to be major to be on the Sanhedrin, but the most junior began with the voting, and then it proceeded in order of seniority until the most senior veteran judge in the Sanhedrin cast the last vote. Why did they go from junior to senior? You tell me, please. Give me a suggestion. Any suggestions? Well, they wanted to be sure that a junior was not influenced by a more senior opinion that had been said before. So they went from junior to senior. Now, listen to this. In order to resolve an issue in Jewish law, you need a majority. Okay? No question about that. When it comes to capital cases, the Torah has incredible stringencies. I mentioned before that the Torah posits death sentences for many things, and then has unbelievable requirements which make it almost impossible to administer. And some of them are these. That when the vote takes place, in order to get a conviction in a Beis Din, a capital conviction, you need many, many features. One of them is, for example, a simple majority is not good enough. Let's say there's a majority of 1 to acquit, the person's acquitted. But a majority of 1 to convict is not enough. You need a bigger majority than that. Now, this is totally unique. In all of Jewish law, a slight majority is good enough. When it comes to kashrut, we have extra requirements. We want 1 in 60. We have all sorts of... But from a naked Torah point of view, a majority annuls a minority. And therefore, 1 vote, right, more on one side than the other should be enough, not in capital cases. We require more than a simple majority. We have many, many stringencies when it comes to capital cases. Now, here's one of the most seemingly bizarre. If you've never heard this before, you probably won't believe me. But here it is. There's one massive majority, one particular proportion of massive majority to convict that paradoxically acquits. If you have that particular massive majority, where the majority feel that the criminal is culpable, and if that majority is what the vote turns out to be, he's acquitted. By the way, he's not acquitted in a murder case. In death sentences, he's acquitted completely. In murder, the person is not freed. And there are many reasons for that. Murder is unique, right? Although we cannot apply one of the 4 Torah death sentences, but nevertheless the person is not released if he's a danger to others or and various other circumstances. But the point is, he's not convicted in this fashion at this time. Now, which percentage, you tell me, which percentage of majority to convict paradoxically acquits. You tell me, what proportion? 90 to 10, 95 to 5? Okay, here's the answer. 100%. If all the judges judge the person to be guilty, he's innocent, or he's acquitted. That makes sense? In other words, every single judge is clear that the person's guilty. They all vote guilty. He's free. Any logic to that? Well, again, this is not directly our subject, but I'll give you a suggestion that is brought down. And one of the suggestions is this. If everybody judges him to be guilty, no one argues in his defense. Again, I'm not getting into technicalities, actually. It's not actually the vote, it's a stage of argumentation. By the way, the arguments have to begin in his favor. If the arguments begin against him, the case is closed. I mean, there are unbelievable stringencies in Jewish law. But I'm simplifying the case greatly. But basically the answer is this. If nobody spoke in his favor, we are anxious they did not examine the case well enough. If nobody could find some possible doubt, nobody could defend him at all, we're anxious that they judged too quickly, did not examine the case well enough. That's unacceptable. If you want to have a model for this, there was a play written. This play must have been written 1950 or maybe prior to that. I don't actually remember when it was written. But this is a play called 12 Angry Men. It was made into a movie at least once, maybe twice. Probably in the 1950s it was made into a movie. I think the starring actor was a person called Fonda, Henry Fonda. I think that was the name of the actor. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was an old black and white movie. If you watch movies, which you should not, this is a kosher movie. 12 Angry Men. There's only 12 men in the play. There's not a woman in the play, right? Nothing can go wrong, So that's, and I used to say to people in the old days, Victor Miller used to say, this is a great DVD to get to show on your television the last one you should show before you kick the screen out and use it as a case to keep your Gemaras in. But anyway, the point is, I suggest highly you read the screenplay. Read the play, right? If you've ever seen it produced, it's a brilliant piece of drama, if you're into drama. It's a wonderful piece of theatre. And it consists of 12 men in an American jury room. That's the whole play. There's only one scene. They're locked into a jury room, having just heard the evidence in a case in which a young man clearly killed his father. Clearly. Witnesses saw the stabbing. It's an open and shut case if there ever was one. They get into the jury room, and 11 of them vote immediately that the young man's guilty. And one man of the 12 thinks there may be room for doubt. And as the drama unfolds, he tries to show them in this almost impossible situation why there may be legitimate room for doubt. It's very dramatic and beautifully done. It's a classic piece of kosher drama. Judaism requires that. Judaism requires an advocate, otherwise the case is not valid. Now, Howard, I'm glad to see that the Beis Yaakov in Toronto has a broad sense of educational responsibility. Very, very. Which Beis Yaakov was that, Howard? Was that Rabbi Fagenbaum? Howard? Oh, okay, well, okay, very impressive. Very impressive. I think they should teach it in all the schools. Okay, now, let's come back to our case. The judges are sitting on the Sanhedrin, and the vote begins. Watch carefully. There's a man on trial for his life. He's standing right here. The judges are sitting in a semicircle, and they're voting. And the vote goes like this. Guilty, 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 execute, death, guilty, guilty, until all have spoken but the last one. I hope you can see what's coming. The last judge, the great Mufla Sheba Sanhedrin, he's the black belt senior authority of the generation. He's left to vote, and he knows the accused is guilty. See the problem? All of them have voted guilty. He casts the last vote. If they all say guilty, if he says guilty, therefore you have a unanimous vote for guilty, the criminal is acquitted, which this senior personality knows is wrong. If he lies and says innocent, then the man's guilty and convicted, which is the truth, as he sees it. What should he do? Let's get it clear. Do we all see the problem, please? Give me a quick yes if you understand the dilemma. Okay, so here's this final authority, and he has to make a decision. Do I vote for the truth? Clearly, the man's guilty. I say guilty. And he walks free, which is a travesty and a miscarriage of justice. Do I distort the truth and say innocent, which then means there's the required majority for conviction, and he's then convicted, which is the truth. Do I say the truth to ensure a falsehood results? Do I say a falsehood to ensure that the truth results? The decision that we render in this case is absolutely clear. He says the truth. You see the man's guilty, you say guilty. He walks free, that's God's problem, not ours. The din of a dayan is lefif mashe enav roes. He has to judge according to the way his eyes see. He says the truth. Danny, what does this have to do with Chetzor Gavra? Danny, what does this have to do? What does this have to do with the case? This is all on the Gavra of the dayan. This is all on the obligation of the dayan. No, Elliot, that's not the moral of the story. And you certainly will not escape Misa B'dei Shamayim. But anyway, that is the case. So he sat there and he said to himself, well, if that's the case, I must vote for the truth. That's the law of the Sanhedrin. I'm sitting in a parallel situation. There are two others with me. I see the truth clearly. These two are saying false. I need to say the truth. And that's the resolution that is suggested to the Pischei Tshuva. And the Pischei Tshuva writes, wrong. You are comparing unlike cases. In the case of the Sanhedrin, the judge should say the truth and accept a false outcome. In your case, you should lie. Say, I don't know, and get out of there. The two cases are not parallel. Now, to understand this, let us go through our subject. Yes, abstain, Abe, which of course is a falsehood, right? The judge is not allowed to abstain. That's a falsehood. To abstain when you can vote is a total Torah prohibition. To abstain from giving evidence is a Torah prohibition as well, by the way. Okay, now, by the way, it's a prohibition for a judge to abstain even if he's afraid. Okay, let's go back to our problem, and I hope you'll see how we can circle back to this. Our problem was, does your free will ever affect anyone else? So it seems that there are two ways to explain this. Please stay with me. Please stay with me and see if we can work through this together. Let's forget that case. We'll come back to it at the end of our discussion. Let's work through our fundamental problem. Does my free will ever affect you? I would like to suggest to you there are only two ways to approach this problem, and I think one of them is totally wrong and one is totally right. It happens to be the one that is not conventionally understood to be right, but I'll try to convince you that it is. So there are two ways to handle the problem. Mr. A kills Mr. B. Okay, B is the victim, A kills him, and we now ask what actually happened here. There are two possible interpretations. One interpretation is that A killed B. B was going to die then anyway. Only harbe shluchim lamakom. God has many agents and could kill him in many ways. That morning at 11:01, Mr. B was going to die. Okay? And God was going to kill him. Heart attack, brick falling off a building, a bus coming round the corner too fast, something would have happened. At just before 11:01, Mr. A turned the corner and pointed a gun at B and was about to shoot. Hashem stepped back, God steps back and he says, go right ahead. I was looking for somebody to do the job. Had it not been you, I would have used a brain virus or a heart attack. I would have had a vessel burst in the person's brain. I was about to wipe him out, but go right ahead. You want to do the sin? You'll be accountable. Be my guest. And so what happened was, A killed B, but actually the correct interpretation is that B was going to die anyway. A, of course, is guilty, make no mistake. This discussion today has got nothing to do with guilt. In all positions, we agree that the murderer is guilty, and he'll bear the consequences. No question about that. The question we're debating is, would it have happened anyway, other than by his action? So one interpretation is, yes, and indeed, any time anyone ever harms anyone else, when anyone ever kills anyone else, the correct interpretation is it was going to happen anyway. Right? That's certainly viable. You pulled the trigger. You chose to be the agent. That is a sin. And you bear the consequences. And you committed murder. But it was a murder that would have been a death anyway. Okay? Let me put it in one of the most extremely potent phrasings that we find, which is Rav Sadia Gaon. And please don't misunderstand. I'm bringing this as a source. I'll show you that it's a misunderstood source. But I just want to use it because it's the most elegant phrasing of this problem. And I'm paraphrasing slightly. He says, when a person's walking down the road with a death sentence on him and somebody kills him, all that happens is that a death becomes a murder. You cannot say it more succinctly and elegantly than that. a missa becomes a retzach. And when someone's decreed to lose a certain amount of money and someone steals from him, all that happens is a loss became a theft. Now, I challenge you to say it. You cannot say it more elegantly. You know, the great Rishonim, we're going back to Rav Saadia Gaon, before the 10th century, the 9th century. There's no one could ever speak as briefly and elegantly as that. The death was inevitable. Now it became a murder. Had he not murdered him, it would have been a death. The loss was inevitable. Now you chose to steal, it became a theft. Okay, this is a misunderstood source, as I'll try to explain as we go along, but it's a beautiful exposition, at least, of what purports to be an understanding. But there's another possibility. The other possibility, Tzvi, the Chovis Halvavos does say that, and I'll try to show you why you're misunderstanding him. I'm not claiming that anything happens without Hashem's permission. Not at all. Absolutely clear. And yet, I'll try to show you that you can do things to people that Hashem would not have done. So stay with me, please. Please, let's avoid our preconceptions. There's a second interpretation, and that is that Mr. A was walking down the street, right, or Mr. B was walking down the street, and he was not going to die that day. And when A pulled the trigger and killed him, he caused a death that would not have happened. That's another possibility. Now, the first case, the first interpretation is it was going to happen anyway. You caused the death, but it was a death that was going to happen anyway, right? So you didn't cause any change in the world. His family were going to suffer the loss, all the stuff. Or when you stole something from someone, you never caused any damage to him or his family or his possessions. It was going to happen anyway. You just chose to be the agent. This seriously pulls the teeth of your capacity to act in the world. It means you never really affect anyone else. I mean, you never affect them in a way that would not have happened otherwise. This is certainly not the way the world appears to us. Imagine you get into your car, you're about to pull off. Some careless fool backs right into you and makes a big dent in your car. You get out and you start yelling and screaming. Well, of course, you wouldn't yell and scream. You're all Torah students. You'd get out and say, good evening. You say to the fellow, look what you did to my car. The fellow says to you, oh, you're a religious Jew, aren't you? You say, yes. He says, well, you must believe you had it coming. Is that how we see the world? I don't think so. So here's the question. Is that the right interpretation? Which is very limiting in terms of my free will. Or do we say that you could in fact do something to someone else that was not going to happen? You became the cause of that event. The family can turn around to this criminal and say, you killed our father. It was not going to happen anyway. That's a second interpretation. That's amazingly empowering in terms of the agent, but it's immensely scary in terms of the victim, that people could do things to you that were not going to happen otherwise. Which is the correct interpretation? The correct one is the second one. You can do things to people that would not have happened otherwise. God has to agree. I have no problem with that. Tzvi, God has to allow it. He's got to step in and say, I'm not interfering here, and we'll deal with that. But nevertheless, you could do something to someone that would not have happened otherwise. In fact, I know of no sources that say the opposite. I know of no sources that say the opposite. There are many that purport to be the opposite, and I'll show you that if you read them carefully, they do not say anything different than what I'm saying. Not only that, I don't even know anybody who says that what I'm going to say is wrong. Right? None of our great classic commentators. They all take the line that I'm trying to establish for you now. Let me say it again. I know it's distressing, and I know it's surprising, but let me, Mordechai, what does that have to do with our subject? Yippol HaNoifel has got nothing to do with one person harming another. Mordechai, what are you saying? You're talking about a person falling, right, who is destined to fall anyway. What does that have to do with one person harming another? Where does that show me one person harming another person? No one pushed him off the roof. Please stay with me. Focus, okay? Please, let's listen to what's being said. So, let's go through a few sources. What I'm telling you is that the correct Torah approach here, Rav Moshe told me, ze pashut kach. It is obvious that it's this way. Simple. Right? Rav Grovitz from Gateshead says the same thing. Many other sources say the same thing. Eli, we quoted Rav Saadia, and I'll show you that is not the way to learn. Just to put you out of your misery. What are the words Rav Saadia Gaon says? He says, when somebody, listen carefully, when somebody's walking down the street with a decree upon him to die, he has a decree to die, and someone kills him, the death becomes a murder. But Rav Saadia doesn't talk about somebody walking down the street with no decree. I'm asking, could you kill somebody who has no decree to die? He doesn't say a word about that. Not a word. Everybody agrees when God has decreed that somebody will die, he will die. When God's decreed that you lose a certain amount of money, you'll lose the money. The question is, what when God has not decreed? God says, that person's cool, I've got nothing against him, no decrees. Could you then step in and invoke a decree? Okay, stay with me, please. Ellie, good question. Stay with me now. Let me give you a few sources for this very amazing and distressing point of view. I'll give you a simple one, and then I'll give you the classical one. Here's the simple source. We say in Tachnun, Vayomer David el Gad, King David said to Gad the prophet, Niplana b'yad Hashem, let us fall into God's hand, ki rabim rachamav, because his mercy is very great. Ubiyad Adam al epola, let me not fall into human hand. Oh, that is very, very telling. Let's get this clear. Again, I'm simplifying the case, you can look it up yourself, but for streamlining, understanding, I'm slightly simplifying. But here's what happened. God came to King David and said to him, David, you and your people have sinned. You need suffering. You need suffering. I'm going to give you a choice of what sort of suffering you want. You can have epidemic. Actually offered him 3, an epidemic and famine and war. Let's take 2 of them for now. You can have an illness, an epidemic, or you can have a war with your enemies. Up to you. I give you the choice. What do you wish for yourself and your people? David said, God, I will take the epidemic. I'll take the disease. You know why? Because that comes from your hand. And your hand is merciful. If it comes from a human, there's no telling what will happen. That is very, very interesting. That means David was worried about human free will affecting him more than God would have. This is a very clear proof that humans can do to you more than would otherwise have occurred. Let's get it clear. Vayomer David el Gad, David said to God, Niplana b'yad Hashem, please let us fall into God's hand. Give me an illness, please. Ubiyad Adam al epola, let me not fall into human hand. Ki rabim rachamav, because God's hand is merciful. Hashem will give it to me with all the mercy that he judges appropriate. But you leave me to the enemy, there's no trusting a Philistine soldier. He may be more cruel than God decreed. You see, people think, well, every bullet's got its name on. Every bullet's got your name on. If a Philistine sword has your... In other words, you're only going to get what's coming to you. By rights, King David should have said, flip a coin, what's the difference? It's all up to God. He's only going to give me what I deserve. What's the difference who the agent is? He didn't say that. He said, I'll take it directly from God's hand, because then it will have the right degree of mercy. But trusting a human being, no way. A human could hurt me more than God would. Oh, so you see that humans have the power to harm you in a way that God was not going to do. Okay? This is a very clear indication, right, of the point that I'm making. Let's go to the next proof. Already people are trying to object before hearing the proofs. Stay with me. I'll give you the formal proof. Without question, this is the classic proof. Without discussing this, we have not discussed the subject professionally. And that's the Orach Chaim. This is by far the best known, although the Zohar says the same thing, the Alshich says the same thing, the Netziv says the same thing, the Malbim says the same thing. Virtually all our great commentaries on the same piece of Chumash say the same thing. But the Orach Chaim is the classic, and so let me speak out what he says. As you know, Joseph was a threat to the brothers. Without going into the whole story, they judged that he needed to be put to death. How brothers could make a base din on a brother, there's many, many questions, but nevertheless they decided he needed to be killed. They saw him approaching in the distance. They said, Hinei bala chalomois hazeba. Behold, this dreamer of dreams approaches. Let's kill him and see what becomes. V'nireh ma yeh michalomoisav. Let's kill him and see what becomes of his dreams. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. So the Orach Chaim explains as follows. What do they mean, let's see what becomes of his dreams? These weren't childish people speaking sarcastically. Here's what they meant. Joseph dreamed at age 17 that we will bow down to him in the future. We claim that those dreams are forgeries and fakes. He never had such dreams. He's an imposter. And that means he's a threat to the future of the Jewish people. Let's kill him. And here's what will happen. If we kill him, not only will justice be done, but justice will be seen to be done. Because the moment he dies, it will be immediately apparent that the dreams are false, because there ain't going to be a future where we'll bow down to him. Let's get this clear. Joseph is born here. Age 17, he has the dreams. That somewhere in the future we'll bow down to him. But if we kill him now, then there's not going to be a future in which we'll bow down to him, because he's dead. Which means not only will we do justice, justice will immediately be seen to be true. Because prophecy cannot be wrong. There's a prophecy that we'll bow down to in the future. But if we kill him before we bow down, then we see the prophecy was false. So we'll be guaranteed that our justice is correct. Reuven, the oldest brother, stepped forward and he said, gentlemen, you're making a major hashkafic mistake. A major mistake. I would like to suggest to you that free will is so important, human free will to impinge on others is so important, that God will allow you to kill him, because human free will could kill somebody even if there's no decree upon him to die. And you will wrongly conclude that his dreams were false and that you were correct, and you'll be wrong. He may have had prophetic dreams, correct ones, but God's going to step back and say, I'm not interfering with free will. I'll rearrange the dreams. I'll do something else with the future. I'll work it out. But I'm not going to interfere with human free will. That's what I created the world for. And you'll conclude that you are right, and you'll be wrong. So the brother said to Reuben, what should we do? He said, put him into this pit of snakes and scorpions. Because snakes and scorpions don't have any free will. And no self-respecting scorpion is going to touch you unless he has a decree to do so. And it's written on his sting is your name. Let's get this clear. What Reuben tried to do was, and it says, Vayatzileu miyadam, Reuben saved him from their hand. Reuben saved him from their hand. The Ohr HaChaim says he was not trying to save Joseph from his fate. He was only trying to save him from the hand of human free will. The snakes and scorpions will do whatever he deserves. That's up to God. No snake or scorpion will touch you if you don't deserve it, if it's not in your hashgacha. Because snakes and scorpions got no free will. Leave him to the snakes and scorpions. That's clearly from God. But you touch him with your human hand, your hand, the hand of free will, all bets are off. Vayatzilehu miyadam. He saved Joseph from their hand. Says the Ohr HaChaim, miyad habechiri, from the hand of human free will. To be sure, the Maharal points out that the pit was not full of snakes and scorpions. They were enough to be dangerous. The reason is, if the pit was full of snakes and scorpions, and you throw someone onto a pile of snakes and scorpions and he dies, you killed him. That's guaranteed death. If you hold someone's head underwater and you say, I didn't kill him, it was just the lack of oxygen. No, that's murder. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a pit in which there were some snakes and scorpions, a dangerous place. You put him in danger. Now God decides, does he deserve to be saved or not? Maybe yes, maybe not. If not, then he deserved it. If he deserves to be saved, he'll be saved. But God will not do that when it's your free will. Human free will is what the world was created for. God doesn't interfere with that. He may interfere under certain circumstances, but he may not. And therefore, Brian's asking me about Daniel in the lion's den. We'll get there in a moment. I'm getting someone who wants to know the practical implication. The practical implication is that people could harm you even when God is not going to harm you. That's the practical, scary implication. People could put you in a situation of danger that God would not have done. In that situation, God will have to decide, you deserve to be protected. Maybe yes, maybe not. But you can put someone else in a situation of danger of your own free will. In that situation, God may protect the person. We'll discuss that. And therefore, says the Ohr HaChaim, listen carefully, he says it explicitly, it's possible to kill someone who has no decree of death upon them. Let me sow those scary words again. It is possible even to kill someone who does not have a decree of death upon him. Of course, many times somebody kills someone else. There was a decree of death. Maybe that's 99% of the times. But it's possible to put someone in a situation of danger where God was not going to kill him. And because of you free will, we're talking about Jews and non-Jews here. Please, Elio, let's not get sidetracked. This is human beings. Humans have moral free will. Well, you think only Jews make free will decisions? You think non-Jews who are wicked are guiltless? What are you talking about? So, stay with me here. Stay with me. On track, please. On track. That is the famous Ohr HaChaim. The Zohar says exactly the same. The way the Zohar puts it, the Zohar says you can be thrown into a pit of snakes and scorpions in which you need a miraculous redemption. Not everyone merits miracles. Which means, right? That means you could. The miracle of being saved from a human free will is much greater miracle than being saved from animals. By the way, the Medrash says that when the brothers saw Joseph approaching, they set their dogs on him. Because dogs have got no free will. They thought that'll be a test. The dogs didn't kill him. So then they put him in the pit of snakes and scorpions. The point was to avoid using their human hand of free will. I'm getting a lot of irrelevant questions. Could you please just focus on the subject? Okay. Until we get through it and understand it. It's not possible to know in any given situation whether there's a decree or not. You don't know. Maybe there was a decree. Maybe 99.9% of all people who kill by other people, there was a decree upon them. Indeed. Maybe Joseph had a decree. The point is you don't know. It's theoretically... Let me give you a few other proofs. And by the time you've seen these, I think you'll realize how obvious this is. Once you see it everywhere. Someone asked me about Daniel in the lion's den. So let's talk about that. That's a famous... The Netziv talks about that. He gives many other proofs. I wish we had time to go through all of them. But here's one. This is an amazing proof. Listen to this. The king, Darius as he's known, was the king at the time when Daniel was an advisor in his court. Daniel was an advisor to the king. He was a major minister in his court. And Daniel was accused of disloyalty by the non-Jewish courtiers, as often happens, unfortunately. You listen to Rabbi Hirsch's series on great Jews who've been advisors in non-Jewish, or doctors in to non-Jewish kings and queens. Fascinating series. Tuesday nights. But Daniel was an advisor to the king. He was accused of disloyalty. So the king said to his courtiers, you know what? I think he's a holy man. Daniel, he's holy like his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He's loyal to me and he's a holy man. But to prove that I'm right, I will throw him into a pit of hungry lions. I'll throw him into a den of hungry lions and see what happens. I believe that he will be miraculously saved. His friends were saved from the furnace, miraculously, because they were righteous, and I'm telling you he'll be saved from the lions. If I'm right, you'll see. If I'm wrong, they'll tear him to pieces, and we will know that you were correct, and he'll get his punishment. And that's the story of Daniel in the lion's den. What happened? The king, listen to this amazing thing. They threw him into the lion's den. The king threw him into the lion's den. And then the next pasuk says, the king issued an order to seal the mouth of the lion's den with a big stone, so that his enemies could not kill him. They wouldn't shoot arrows in and kill him, or use their spears, and then say that the lions killed him. Listen to what's going on. The king is confident that Daniel will be saved miraculously from hungry lions. But human beings, all bets are off. Of course it's like a pit. Tzvi, what are you asking me? Of course it's a pit of snakes and scorpions. It's much worse than that. It's guaranteed death. That's the point. The king put him into a situation of absolute guaranteed death. Hungry lions. No question he's going to get 10 limb from him, unless he's protected by a miracle. But the king says he's a holy man. He'll be protected in a fire. What, Tzvi, you think the fire wasn't guaranteed death? The king's put him into a situation of guaranteed death. Because he holds that Daniel is so high spiritually, he'll be protected miraculously. And despite that, he's worried that people will kill him. This man who will be protected from hungry lions will be vulnerable to humans. What's the message, says the Netziv? Human beings have a type of free will that could kill a person even who deserves miraculous salvation. Because human free will, very important. And so Daniel survived the lions. But he may not have survived humans. May not. That was the concern. By the way, young Emmanuel pointed this out to me. One of the Emmanuel family pointed this out to me. Very beautiful. When Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah were walking around in the fire, surviving in the fire, Jonathan, what's wrong with a proof from a non-Jew? What's the problem from the? He was a great man. Darius was a king. First of all, he might have been Jewish, Jonathan. First of all, he might have been Jewish, a son of Esther, okay, or grandson of Esther. It's possible he was Jewish. And if he was not Jewish, what, a non-Jew can't understand the mechanisms of free will? With a man like Daniel as his minister. What does Eov have to do with this, Brian? What does Eov have to do with one person harming another? Okay, so listen to this. Hananiah and Mishael are walking around in the fire. Listen to this amazing observation. I never knew this till I was told. The Psukim say they were hesitant, or the Gemara, the Chazal say they were hesitant to come out of the fire. They waited until the king asked them to step out of the furnace. Why? They were worried that if the king really hated them and wanted them to die, which is why he threw them into the fire, when they stepped out of the fire, he would kill them. Let's get this clear. They're walking around in a fiery furnace, so hot that anyone standing around had been burnt. They're walking around quite comfortable in the midst of a fire. They're hesitant to exit the fire in case the king kills them. In other words, impervious to a furnace, miraculously. Human beings? No. They waited in the fire till the king invited them out, so they knew that he wouldn't harm them. You see how clear this is? You see how clear this is? Okay, it's a different Darius, Jonas, and so what? This is Darius the second, indeed, so... What do you mean before Esther? It might have been before. It might have been after. It could have been 2 generations later. That's not the point. This is not the point. Okay. What have we learned? And by the way, you want sources for this. Rav Chaim Kanievsky says this. Rav Steinman says this. How many sources do you need? Now, let's just deal with some sources that appear contrary. Chovos Halvavos is often quoted, Rav Sadja. All those sources say one thing. They say nothing ever happens without Hashem's permission. Some go so far as to say everything that happens is decreed by Hashem. Absolutely. No one's arguing about that. You put a person in a situation of danger, Hashem has to decree what will happen. Will He save them or not? Will He decree that they're saved, or decree that they'll go under? Will He permit, or will He not permit? Nothing happens without Hashem's permission. Let's get that clear. Everybody agrees. And that's all the sources are saying. Right? But could you put someone in a situation of danger in the first place, where there was no decree before? None of them talk about that. No one says that that's not possible. Nobody. There's a wonderful article on this by Rav Yaakov Hillel, a long piece in Mekatziel. Rav Gurvitz has a wonderful piece in Chumash on this, saying exactly this. By the way, Rav Gurvitz's piece argues through all those who say differently, read them all wrongly, Chovos Halvavos and of Sadja and many others, right? Rabbeinu Yonah, many sources, and he shows how to read them. And in every case, they're not saying anything against this. All they're saying is when you are in a situation of danger, then Hashem has to give permission. Obviously, no one's disagreeing with that. Nothing happens without His permission. The Chazon Ish puts it like this. The Chazon Ish says, sometimes Hashem issues a decree that there'll be no decree at all, that you will not be protected if a virus comes your way or a person tries to harm you. I'm sorry, you lived as a statistic, given over to chance. That's what you'll feel in the world. He says this, one of the most scary types of decree that God could ever issue is no decree at all. You want nothing to do with me? Nothing to do with you. I wash my hands of you. You walk into the world as a mere statistic. Something goes wrong in an unlucky fashion, you suffer unlucky consequence. That's what you want. That's what I give you. And others walk with Hashgacha all the time. That's what the Chazon Ish says. Okay, in a couple of minutes that we have left, you know what? We're not going to be able to close the circle and come back to our original. Can we do that, really? Can we do that? You know what? I think we can. Can we? No. We need to discuss a piece in the Chinuch here. The Chinuch seems to say the opposite, but there's another place in the Chinuch where he says, like I'm saying, we'll need to complete the discussion. I don't know how long I can keep people over an hour. I think that's probably unreasonable. So I think we'll stop here, and next time we'll pick it up. What our agenda is to go further and discuss the second part of this discussion, namely, can you do anything you want to anybody under all circumstances? The answer is no. There are many limitations. We are not saying that you could do whatever you want to anyone using your free will. Very far from it. There's a very narrow window in which you could use your free will against someone else. Very limited. 4 or 5 or 6 variables that limit it very severely. So Mitzvah Hashem will stop the discussion here. And what we'll do next time in Mitzvah Hashem next week, we'll have a brief summary of where we are now. And then I'll try to go through all the variables that limit your free will against other people. Then I'll discuss the Chinuch, which has 2 apparently conflicting takes on this subject. And I'll come back to the court case and try to resolve that. Where is this in Rav Gurvitz? It's in his book on Chumash, in the Parsha of Yosef and his brothers. I think his sefer is called Va'anfea Arze El. There you'll find it on Yosef and his brothers. If you want the original printout, I'll send it to you if you email me. Anyone who's interested in email me, I will send you the piece from Rabbi Hillel, from Rabbi Gurvitz, and you will then have a very excellent written Torah source. There's also a piece on this in Rav Steinman's book. There's a piece in this in the Sichas conversations of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. There are many, many sources for this. Anybody has interest, you can own it. Josh, how do you live this in the practical world? What's the question? You could be put in a situation. The practical outcome is that people are dangerous. People are dangerous. Take more protection against people than against non-human agents. Josh, you want a halachic ruling? I'll tell you what the Chasam Sofer says. I believe it's a Chasam Sofer. Here's his practical ruling. Let's say you need to make an escape. Josh, this is for you. You insist on a practical take-home message? Here it is. You are located. You understand the Netziv is on Yosef and his brothers. The Netziv is on Yosef, Yehuda facing Yosef. There's also a Netziv on the Daniel and the king. Earlier sources in Rishonim, there's a Chinuch. There's a Chinuch which I'll go through next week, which says this clearly. And there's a Zohar. Chaim, I hope that's good enough for you. The Zohar says exactly the same thing about Yosef and his brothers. Exactly the same. The Ohr HaChaim doesn't quote the Zohar, but it's exactly the same thing. The Zohar doesn't use the word Bechira, but it certainly says the same thing. Josh, here's your practical ruling, and we'll finish with this. You are living in a place which is dangerous. You need to make an escape. You need to make an escape. You have two routes of escape. One takes you through a war zone, and one takes you through an epidemic zone. Again, all else being equal, okay? The same statistical risk, right? The same statistical risk. You can go through a war zone where there's people who might harm you. You can go through a disease zone. Says the Chasam Sofer, take the disease. That comes from God. There's no telling what humans might do to you. By the way, Josh, I hope you heard that. I'll give you one further one. Again, it's everywhere. I'll leave you with this thought. Sarah Devira, you're late. You're late. You'll have to go back and listen to the recording. I'll leave you with this. The question is why the Egyptians were punished for harming the Jewish people. Why were they punished? After all, they fulfilled the decree. There was a prophecy issued a long time before that they would enslave the Jewish people. Stay with me carefully. Chaim, what does that have to do with anything? Disease spread by people. What are you asking me? What are you asking me? There's an epidemic going on. There's a disease. Disease is from God. And there's another place where there's a war zone. You know, I sometimes think people try not to understand. And often it's the people with a learning background, unfortunately. The goal is to try to understand, not to try not to understand. Unless people are just winding me up. Anyway, here's the thing. Why were the Egyptians punished for harming the Jewish people? It was predicted. They should have got reward. They should have turned around and said, Hashem, we just fulfilled your decree. There are many answers to this. If you remind me, I'll go through some of them. But here's one, the Ramban. He says the reason that the Egyptians were punished was because they did more than was decreed. God decreed a certain amount of suffering. Danny, that's not the answer. Danny, that is not the answer I'm giving. That's another answer. That's another answer. Another answer is the Kavanah. I'm not talking about that. There's many answers to this. The Rambam has an answer. The Ramban has two answers. I'm giving you one unique answer. Because they did more than God intended. He intended the Jewish people to suffer a certain amount. The Egyptians caused that amount and more. According to this answer, the Egyptians were only punished for doing more, not for doing the minimal amount that was meant to be. There's another answer, that even the amount that was meant to be, they had the wrong intention, Danny. So they were punished for that as well. And the Rambam has another answer. But I'm just choosing one of them to show you. The Egyptians did more harm to the Jews than God decreed. It's based on a pasuk. Ani ksafti ma'at, v'hem azru l'ra. I got angry a little bit, says Hashem, and they hurt more. Hashem in a verse telling you that I wanted a certain amount of harm, and human beings went further and did more. So you see from this very clearly that humans can perpetrate more than God decreed. I'll leave you with that. There's plenty to think about. Emitz Hashem will close the discussion next time. If anyone else wants to come to this discussion, I would suggest you tell them to listen to this recording so we don't have to repeat all of this. And you can look up the details or background in the book. Thank you very much, Gemma. Thanks to all of you. Have a wonderful week, and I look forward to trying to close the circle next week. Meantime, stay out of danger, especially at the hands of human beings. All the best.